Greetings and salutations. This is a video about audio. We're going to talk about the Nagaoka MP-110 Phono cartridge. And yes, I am late to the party. This cartridge came out in 2017. There are many videos on YouTube about it. There are many great reviews online about it. And you have probably watched some and read some. Well, I'm here to tell you that all the good things you've heard about this cartridge are true. It's an amazing cartridge, and it sells for about $130 US as of the time that I'm recording this video. Now, you may pay a little bit more or a little bit less depending on where you shop. And I can tell you this, if you have $130, you need to go ahead and get yourself one of these cartridges. It's that good. If you don't have $130, then you need to sell something so you can get $130 so you can buy you one of these cartridges. It's that good. So this cartridge caught up with me the other day, and I have been listening to it nonstop since I got it. It has really surprised me. Those of you who have followed this channel for many years will know that I have done a video or talked about in other videos just about every Phono cartridge available over the last 10 years for less than $200. I have not had one show up and blow me away like this one did. It is absolutely an amazing cartridge. Arthur Smith, who is part of the JC's Phono Works Facebook group, asked whether this could be compared to the Shure M97XE. And I really don't think you can compare it directly with that. Because some folks say, well, the MP-110, they're going for a warm audiophile sound. And it is a warm sound. It doesn't have a really strident high end to it, but there certainly is plenty there, and there's lots of detail. It's hard to compare it with the M97XE for a couple of reasons. First of all, the M97XE has that rather dim high end because of the fact that Shure, for some reason or the other, engineered that cartridge to have a very peculiar loading requirement. And if you could modify your preamp to mate up with that cartridge properly, then it could sound actually quite bright. But the other thing about that cartridge is the fact that the M97XE has sort of a compressed, demurred mid-range. And it's an interesting sound, and it can be very fun to listen to for a while. This cartridge is nothing like that. It will jump up and bite you. It has a lot of punch and a great deal of clarity, so much so that the only cartridges that I could directly compare it to are those that have moving coil designs and not moving magnet. We're talking about something like the Ortophon Quintet or something like that, something that costs 5 or 10 times more than what this cartridge costs, and you need a specialized preamp to use. So it's amazing on that level. When you get the cartridge, you get this really nifty box. I've got to talk about it because this is so Japanese. It is artistic and industrial at the same time. They have this plastic container that the cartridge is screwed into, and then they have this polycarbonate see-through insert that goes over top of it, and this thing is about 1/8 of an inch thick all the way around, and it only fits into that box one way. So you would think, oh, well, that's circular hole, circular insert, no problem. No, they have little cutouts on the side where there's these two little flat spaces. It'll only go in one way, so it's a really tight fit. So you could take the box and throw it up against the wall a couple of times, and I don't think you would hurt the cartridge. They give you a whole bunch of screws with this, like 3 or 4 sets of screws. There's a set of screws that comes with the cartridge itself because you have to unscrew it out of that plastic container. And then there's another 2 or 3 sets of different lengths in the bag, along with a screwdriver, a couple of nuts, and a couple of nylon washers. So this will fit into pretty much any head shell. Then you get the booklet that tells you about the cartridge and its care and feeding and all that kind of stuff. It is a standard 1/2-inch cartridge, and it'll work on pretty much any turntable that will accept it. It is comparable in many ways to Audio-Technica cartridges. The pinouts on the back are identical to Audio-Technica cartridges. The distance from the stylus tip to the center of the screw holes is the same as Audio-Technica cartridges. So if you are using an Audio-Technica turntable and you use the trick where you center the screws in the holes on the head shell to align it properly, it'll work. One thing that you've got to keep in mind is this cartridge is a little tall. compared to Audio-Technica cartridges. It's 18 millimeters tall from stylus tip to the top of the cartridge, and that is comparable to the Ortofon OM and 2M series carts. That doesn't seem to be that big of a deal on Audio-Technica turntables. I have an Audio-Technica turntable that I'm using this on, and I've been running Ortofons on it as well. I'm using the AT LP W40WN, and it works fine with 18 millimeter carts. No problems with vertical tracking angle, but it is something to keep in mind. The cartridge has this lovely square design, and one of the things I like about it is the fact that that stylus has those two grips on either side. It's very easy to get a hold of and remove. You're not worried about breaking the stylus or having it flip around in your fingers. Some other manufacturers, they're more into the look of the cart than they are the actual ergonomics of having to work with this thing. And I like the fact that Nagaoka has really made this form-following function instead of being an artistic statement. That big square top on the cartridge certainly makes it easy to align as well. If you can't figure out by looking that the cartridge is lined up properly in the head shell, it's nice and straight, then maybe you ought not to be aligning your own turntable, and you ought to get somebody else to do that for you because it's super easy to align. Mine just sort of aligned itself. I just put it in, looked at it, and went, that's great. Yes, okay, we're good. It took literally 30 seconds to do the alignment, which was amazing to me when I have spent as much as an hour on other cartridges trying to get it right because of all the angles and the curves. So that's another reason I like it an awful lot. Let's talk a bit about the specifications and why I think it is fantastic for 45s. Before we get into that, I want to give a shout out to LP Gear, who made it possible for me to do this video because they were so cool about getting me this cartridge. I'm not sponsored by them. I paid for the cartridge. I'm just giving them a shout out because they are awesome. I had originally ordered a Deft 2 cartridge, which is a cartridge made by LP Gear, and it showed up with some issues, and they were very kind about exchanging it. And at the last minute, I said, could I just get the MP-110 instead? And they made that super easy. And they have been awesome like that for the many years that I have worked with them. And now that Jerry Raskin has shut down Needle Doctor, they're not the only game in town, but boy, it's getting close here in the United States, that's for sure. I was sorry to see Jerry go. Jerry was very kind to me for many years and allowed me to use images from his website. So thank you very much. But he's retired now, had some health issues, I believe, and has shut the Needle Doctor down. Anyway, specifications. First thing that's interesting here is this MP. It's a moving magnet cartridge, but they're using permalloy magnets. Those of you who have been working with tape recorders for many years, like I have, will know that that is an alloy that you hear associated with tape heads a lot because of its durability. Well, they're using that for the magnets in these cartridges, which is quite interesting. You have an aluminum alloy cantilever, and the stylus shape itself is one of the reasons that I think this is great for 45s. It's a 0.4 by 0.7 mil stylus, which is a mild elliptical. And the reason why it's good for 45s is because not all 45s are made out of vinyl. Some of them are made out of polystyrene, especially in the US, and like a Columbia 45 or anything that was distributed by Columbia in the US, or records that were pressed by Monument in Los Angeles. So some of the Warner Brothers and Atlantic records ended up on that, A&M as well. The styrene records do not like to be played with advanced stylus shapes. We're talking about anything above a 0.3 by 0.7 elliptical. Whereas really with a 45, you probably should be playing it with something like a spherical stylus shape, although for a vinyl 45, that's kind of overkill because it's like you don't need it as much as you'd need for styrene. And what I find is, as far as the styrene wear factor is concerned, that a mild elliptical, a 0.4 by 0.7, it as long as it's tracking properly and you are keeping up with keeping your stylus changed so that you're not using a worn stylus, it's going to have the same properties wear-wise as a spherical, but give you the benefit of having an elliptical stylus. And of course that's beneficial for LPs as well. The other reason that this cartridge works very well for 45s is because it is rated for a 5 millivolt output. Now let's talk a little bit about how that works, because you'll notice what it says here is that the output voltage is at 1 kilohertz at 5 centimeters per second velocity. 5 centimeters per second velocity is equal to 0 VU when it comes to sending levels to a record cutter. And basically that is at 1 kilohertz. If you feed a tone to it, the stylus is moving back and forth at 5 centimeters per second. You measure the amount of volume that you're putting into the groove of a record by velocity, not by excursion. And it has to be a fixed frequency like that because of the RIAA curve. So when you're recording records, of course, you de-emphasize the bass and you allow the highs to be pre-emphasized. And then when you play back, that's reversed. Your preamplifier, it boosts the bass and it de-emphasizes the highs. Basically, it's switching back and forth between constant velocity and constant amplitude recording, which is a subject for another video. But anyway, that is the target level. That's considered 0 VU. On an LP, for 45s, they usually jack that up to +3 as long as the 45 itself is under 5 minutes. And in some cases, if they're feeling really flashy, they will ramp that up to +6. A lot of the 45s from the 60s, back when the songs were 2.5 minutes, they would crank that modulation all the way up to +6, which is twice as powerful as 0 VU. You know, when you go up 6 dB, you're doubling the actual power there. So you need to have a cartridge that is going to be able to handle that modulation. And a lot of cartridges can't. So you'll look at the output and it'll say 4 millivolts, 5 millivolts, something like that. And if you're playing something that's recorded at 5 millivolts, great. But if you get above that, things start to fall apart and you start to hear distortion and the audio starts to get ragged. That's not necessarily the stylus not being able to track. That's sometimes the cartridge itself overloading. The coils will overload. Or you can also have where you're just sending so much volume to the preamplifier itself that you're distorting the preamp. So that can happen. But with this cartridge, that doesn't happen. The stylus tracks so well that it's not generating any distortion. And as far as the coils and the characteristics of the magnets, they're not saturating. So I was playing some really hot records into this thing, and I did not hear any undue distortion, as I have heard on some Ortofon and Audio-Technica cartridges, and that was very impressive as well. So if you have a large collection of 45s, like I do, I've got more 45s than I do LPs, that's important that you have a cartridge that can handle them nicely. Channel separation, they're talking about, you know, like 23 dB. What I heard sounded bigger than that. I had no problems with the stereo on this cartridge at all. I found it to be very natural. It wasn't overemphasized, nor did I think it was particularly narrow. I just thought it sounded pretty good. And then the channel balance, which is really important, they've got that down to 1.5 dB. Some of these cartridges will have that stated at 2 or 3 dB. And the thing is that if you have a cartridge that has one channel that's outputting 2 dB or 3 dB more loudness in the left or the right, that's going to be noticeable, gang. And unfortunately, most of the preamps that are out there these days do not include trimmers to trim the left and right channels and make sure everything is balanced. They just don't bother with that. Back in the day, there used to be preamps all the time that had that little feature so you could balance your cartridge. Not anymore. The loading is pretty much the same, and the rest of it's pretty straightforward. The tracking force is 1.5 to 2 grams, which is completely respectable for a 4 by 7 mil elliptical stylus. Back in the day, the Stanton 680 ELs, which were used on the radio a lot, they had 0.4 by 0.7 styli, and they'd track those at 3 grams in some cases. So no problem there as far as record wear or worry about that is concerned. And that compares directly to the old Stanton cartridges. You guys know that those are the ones I usually talk about the most because I grew up with them in radio stations when I was coming up. We were playing records on the radio and listening when I was a kid. I heard a lot of Stantons, the 680s and the 500 and the MK2. So this is a great replacement for my 500 MK2 cartridge. The problem with that was I really love that cartridge, but finding a good replacement stylus is turning into a problem. Now I'm going to experiment with that a little bit later on down the road, but I really wanted to kind of take that out of production because you really need to replace your styli often. If you play records a lot, it should be once every 6 months. If you're at least every once a year, you should buy a new stylus. So I was starting to get to the 6 or 8 month with that cartridge, and I've been playing a lot of records with it. So time to look at getting a new stylus. Speaking of which, for the Nagaoka here, they have a reasonably priced replacement. A lot of the Audio-Technica cartridges and Ortofons, the replacement styli are almost expensive as the cart, but I think $76.12 from LP Gear for a cartridge that cost $136, that's maintainable. I can see that, but sometimes it gets a little ridiculous, like especially with the lower end Audio-Technicas, the styli cost as much as the cartridge. You might as well get a new cart. So anyhow, there you go, gang. That is what I think of this lovely cartridge. My closing thoughts, it's unbelievable what they've done with this cartridge as far as the materials that they're using and the price that they're able to sell it at, as this thing is a giant killer, and it makes a lot of more expensive cartridges sound really bad. That's all I've got to say. It's amazing. This is the best sounding cartridge in my stable of carts right now, and I've got a whole box at this point. Bunch of Audio-Technicas and Ortofons, and nothing sounds like this. So I'm really going to enjoy listening to this as it breaks in. I've only had it a couple of days, and I am this impressed with it, knowing that the sound is going to change. They have a 30-hour break-in period. So had to do a video about this one. Thank you for watching. I certainly do appreciate it. We'll be doing another one again soon.